A private passenger jet is flying north of Moscow when suddenly two loud bangs are heard by locals, and just a few minutes later, the jet is lying in a fiery conflagration on the ground. One of the men listed as a passenger on the plane is Yevgeny Prigozhin, known to most of the world as the man who led the Wagner Group rebellion against Vladimir Putin in June of 2023. But how did Prigozhin go from a criminal and a hot dog stand owner to one of Putin's long-term confidants and then come to openly rebel against him? What really caused the crash of Prigozhin's private jet? And most importantly, what will the Wagner Group do next? We dove into this situation as it was developing to find out more. Prigozhin's always been a shadowy figure. Not much is known about his childhood and teenage years in Russia, although by the time he was in his 20s, he was already involved in fairly serious crimes. This resulted in him going to prison for 9 years for robbery and fraud. After Prigozhin was released back to the streets of St. Petersburg in the 1990s, he decided to leave his life of crime behind, for a while anyway, and take a different path. In fact, a very different path, as he decided to open up a hot dog stand, eventually working his way up to setting up upscale restaurants throughout the city. One of his most famous frequent guests was none other than Vladimir Putin. Since success is all about who you know, especially in an oligarchy, Prigozhin's ties to Putin and his other high-profile Russian officials got him huge catering contracts for state services like schools and the army. However, food isn't all he was cooking up. Prigozhin eventually earned the nickname Putin Chef, partly because he provided catering to the Kremlin, but mostly thanks to the other operations he was setting up for the future Russian president. In addition to being involved with Russia's infamous internet research agency, aka the Russian trolls spearheading disinformation campaigns online, Prigozhin was intimately involved in setting up the Wagner Group. While it might sound like a boring venture capital fund, the Wagner Group was actually in the business of recruiting private military, otherwise known as mercenaries, to work in Ukraine. Sources say it was named after Hitler's favorite composer. As you might have guessed about a mercenary group named after one of Hitler's favorite things, the Wagner Group did some pretty terrible things as an organization. Sponsored by the Russian state and co-founded by Dmitry Utkin, the Wagner Group commenced operations in 2014 in order to support the Russian annexation of Crimea by sending unofficial soldiers to invade the region, keep it guarded, and lend support to pro-Russian groups in other parts of Ukraine, including the Donbass. Who were these unofficial soldiers? Accounts vary, but it seems that even though the Wagner Group started with a whole lot of former Russian military in order to swell their ranks during the war in Ukraine, a good chunk of them were men recruited from jail. In June of 2023, Prigozhin himself stated there are 25,000 of us, though that number only includes those who have survived and are still serving. Prigozhin would offer imprisoned men pardons and a small sum of money in order for them to perform 6-month military rotations in Ukraine. Several journalists and Ukrainian civilians allege that the men of the Wagner Group have committed war crimes and unnecessary violence against civilians, winding an especially harsh road through eastern Ukraine. After Russia's initial military humiliation in its war against Ukraine, the Wagner Group actually helped Putin make several gains, but most importantly being responsible for taking the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut. So how did the relationship between Prigozhin and Putin sour? As the war in Ukraine went on longer than anyone expected, becoming costlier in terms of lives and money by the day, Prigozhin became increasingly irate at the Russian state's failure to adequately supply him and his men, directing his anger mostly at Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Then, Putin supported a state effort to make Russia's paramilitary groups, including the Wagner Group, sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense. Prigozhin balked at the idea, refusing to cede control of his men to the state. Then, in the span of one long, confusing day on June 23rd, Prigozhin told the Russian people that the reasons for the war in Ukraine had always been a lie propagated by a small group of scumbags who had deceived both Putin and the people. Though he initially seemed loyal still to Putin, through this announcement, he later stated the official Russian military had attacked the men of the Wagner Group in Ukraine. The Russian state, of course, denied such a thing, and Prigozhin didn't really produce any proof of such an event, so no one knew who to believe between the two equally unbelievable sides. Nevertheless, he decided to start a long military march toward the Russian capital, which he saw as a march for justice, but Putin saw as, well, a rebellion and an invasion. Everyone who has been closely monitoring the competence of the Russian army will not be surprised to learn that Prigozhin entered military headquarters within 124 miles of the Moscow area and waltzed into the center of the city with little apparent resistance. A furious Putin addressed the nation on Russian television the next morning and stated the following: "What we are facing is precisely treason." He insisted that those who had rebelled against his authority in the military would pay. Prigozhin curiously still stated that he was loyal to Putin and simply vehemently disagreed with the other members of the state's defense apparatus. But after Putin's television address, he seemed to aim his anger at Putin as well. A quick and out-of-left-field intervention by Belarusian leader and Putin ally Alexander Lukashenko seemingly stalled a quickly spiraling situation in Russia. Lukashenko would offer Prigozhin safe haven in Belarus, where he would avoid criminal charges as long as he stopped his march against Putin and the Russian leadership. Any members of the Wagner Group who wanted to officially sign with the Russian Defense Ministry could do so, otherwise they were free to go. This quick and seemingly peaceful resolution puzzled leaders and journalists worldwide. Would Putin and the Russian government, known for its apparently very clumsy detractors experiencing frequent defenestrations and quite coincidental radiation poisonings, let such a challenge to their rule go unpunished? Was Prigozhin really safe and free? Would he disappear, or would he continue in other ways to challenge the Russian state? Well, the answer seemingly came last month. Though earlier in the week, Prigozhin had released a video which showed him in Africa. On Wednesday evening, he was on the passenger list of an Embraer jet flying from Moscow to St. Petersburg, about 200 miles north of Moscow. While crossing the Tver region, locals heard two loud bangs, and video footage showed the small passenger jet plummeting toward the ground with smoke billowing out behind it. Eventually, the plane crashed and broke out into flames. 10 people were listed on the manifest, 7 passengers and 3 crew members, including Prigozhin and Wagner Group co-founder Dmitry Utkin. So far, Utkin, along with a few other people on board the plane, including pilots Alexei Levshin and Rustem Karamov and flight attendant Kristiana Raspopova, have been confirmed dead. Another close associate of Prigozhin's, Valery Chekalov, was also rumored to be on the flight, along with 3 other members of the Wagner Group. This is according to Russia's investigative body, the Dossier Center. Reports seem to confirm that the jet with tail number RA02795 is in fact the one frequently used by Prigozhin, including in his escape from Russia to Belarus in June. As one might suspect, after watching the fiery footage of the plane on the ground, Russian officials confirmed that all 10 people on board the jet had died. But how? Channels associated with the Wagner Group, including the group's unofficial Telegram channel Grey Zone, have already started reporting that air defense missiles brought the plane down. Though a definite possibility, it is likely that civilian radar would have seen air defense missiles careening toward the plane. Of course, a corrupt Russian state might have covered up or in some way disabled this radar in order to avoid exactly this type of detection. Another potential option is that explosives were attached to one or both of the wings, as in early footage it appears that the wing of the plane has been sheared off. In addition, the 2 loud bangs civilians heard on the ground may be attributable to bombs going off in the air. A third, and seemingly unlikely but still plausible option is that the jet might have actually just crashed. Most of the world has imposed sanctions on Russia since its invasion of Ukraine, which has impacted every part of Russian life, from the economy to food supplies. Understandably, Russian planes have been impacted as well, as the state has started to cannibalize old planes for parts to use in the rest of their fleet, creating an extremely treacherous situation in the air for Russian flights. The official cause of the crash has not yet been confirmed, and it is likely that with the Kremlin and the Russian state in charge of the investigation, who are strongly suspected of obtaining revenge on Prigozhin by killing him in his plane crash, the official story of the plane crash will likely be dishonest, so we won't have a definite, real answer for a while, though U.S. intelligence is currently leaning toward explosives planted on the plane. What we will have is real reactions, with the Wagner Group immediately declaring that Russia air defense systems brought down the plane. It's becoming clear that they will not let the assassination of their leader go unpunished. Overextended and exhausted in Ukraine, the Russian military will face a real problem if the many men of the Wagner Group refuse to bolster their military effort. Furthermore, the soldiers of the Wagner Group, some of whom already believe that Russian forces attacked them back in June, might launch an offensive against the Russian military itself, turning the Russian-Ukraine war into a civil war that will distract Russia from its objectives in Ukraine and force a retreat. Another option is that this may be the last straw in terms of the relationship deterioration between Putin and Wagner. Reports from Russia have painted a picture of Putin as increasingly paranoid about loyalty and assassination attempts since his invasion of Ukraine. If he has indeed killed the man that openly revolted against him, the man who led a 25,000-strong mercenary army, it would seem Putin has all the more reason to panic and fear for his life. Putin will try to possibly shift the blame for Prigozhin's death to someone else. The Kremlin is known for refusing to take responsibility for its extrajudicial crimes and leading plenty of false flag attacks over the years to justify the invasion or attack of a neighboring state or political group. Will Putin blame Ukraine? The US? Even for the Kremlin, this would seem difficult to pitch and sell, as Ukraine and the Western world would have a little reason to assassinate a threat and a traitor to the Russian state, especially within Russian borders. So it seems like Putin will have to, in some ways, maintain accountability for this death. He may even own it proudly, as he did publicly threaten that any traitor to the Russian state would pay for his crimes, and killing Prigozhin might make him seem like he's back in control of his crumbling state and military. The strange thing is, it still remains officially unconfirmed if Prigozhin was actually on the plane. Though he is associated with this jet and his name was on the passenger list, it would be an incredibly dangerous idea for Prigozhin to fly between two of the biggest Russian cities just 2 months after his revolt against the state, especially after Putin called him a traitor. Is it possible that Putin and Prigozhin brokered a separate deal, where Putin could save face in front of the Russian people by declaring Prigozhin dead, while Prigozhin would be quietly allowed to remain dead for all intents and purposes and live his life safely somewhere far, far away? Though this has been suggested by some commentators regarding the crash, the reaction of the Wagner Group makes it seem increasingly unlikely. Their rush to blame the defense systems of the Russian state make it appear as though an escalation in conflict between the Wagner Group and the Russian state and military is happening, and soon. If Prigozhin was in on the faking of his own death, it's likely that people higher up in the Wagner Group would be aware as well. One thing that additionally remains unclear is why so many high-ranking members of the ranking group would be traveling together on the small same private plane within Russian borders, especially knowing that Putin harbors a significant grudge against them. The leaders of the Wagner Group have always been incredibly careful about their security for obvious reasons, so why make such a seemingly obvious and apparently fatal blunder? The death of Wagner chief Prigozhin may ironically point to a light at the end of the tunnel for the Ukrainian people, as the resulting political turmoil and military infighting in Russia is likely to lead to a big retreat from the front in Ukraine, though no one can say for sure at this point. However, no matter which way things go, almost one thing is certain: the likely assassination of Prigozhin signals dark days for Russia and its people ahead, not to mention a potential civil conflict within its borders. Do you want to understand more about Russia's invasion of Ukraine or how the Russian state operates in general? Click on this video or the one next to it to learn more.